Hey, DMDongo here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're going to be looking at the Malady Chronicles, headed up by Jason Bakos and Themis Paraskevas, but this is a collaboration, so all of these writers contributed to the 9 stories contained within. It's currently on sale for $14.95 for the PDF, or if you want this glorious hardback, it'll set you back $44.95. There's currently a deal though on the Guild where you can get the hardback and the PDF for the same price, so it's quite a steal. Now, if you're ready, we're going to get diving deep into the 9 disease-ridden adventures contained within. So, the Malady Chronicles, what are you getting in this big tome, this big anthology? You're getting a lot of adventures. You're getting 9 in total that range from levels 1 all the way up to level 15. That's quite a lot of adventure in there, and actually, this book contains ideas on how to run this as a single campaign, which is a really good idea just from a general perspective. There's also a lot of DM tips and things about. However, one thing I want to call out very early on is that a lot of the diseases that are centric to every single adventure in here are references to real-life diseases. And they could have just ignored that completely, but they took the time to take a passage out in the book to say, these are real-life diseases and there's no one in the world that has not been touched by something like this. So understanding the weight and gravity of the situation is a big key here. Managing these expectations and managing how your players interact with them is a key part of it. Making sure everyone is on board with the kinds of adventures that are contained in this book. Saying that though, the way you run diseases and the way you run against these kinds of encounters is very different from the way you run your standard D&D campaign. And in general, your standard D&D adventures. In your standard D&D adventure, there's a main villain that you must defeat. In the case of some of these, not all of them though, there isn't really a main villain. You're trying to combat a disease that really doesn't have any malicious intent in most cases. It just is. And fighting that is a very different way of looking at things. You're fighting the environment rather than an actual enemy. And there's a lot of interesting things that are going on and at play. How do you deal with, as a player, as a character, how do you deal with a plague-stricken town? How do you deal with a disease that's running rampant? It's very different. Yes, your characters might have the ability to lay on hands for 5 hit points and remove a disease from a single person, or even a cleric with lesser restoration can remove one or 2 diseases a day. That's not enough to stop a plague. That's especially in a large city. So how you deal with that and how you manage those kinds of situations is key to a lot of the adventures contained within. Now, I'm not going to go into every specific adventure. I'm going to just pick 2 out that are my favorite. I'm picking the very first one, and I'm picking one that's farther later on, kind of in the chapters, to kind of give you a good spread of where how the different writers dealt with very early level adventures, which are where the bulk of players play, and how they deal with high level adventures, because they're the hardest to write for, just to give you a good understanding of where things are. Now, as for what else is contained in the book, you've also got a set of NPCs or player character ideas, or just general, like, here's some interesting ideas you could run with for either backgrounds for existing players, or for if somebody wanted to have a backstory for a character and they didn't really know what to do, you could leverage these quite easily. And they all have really nice pictures to go along with them. They're really, really quite nice. Then from there, you've got items that you can give to players, malady equipment basically. So these are all things that would help them in combating the diseases. You've got your classic plague doctor's mask, which was originally used just to mask the smell of the dead bodies. Essentially, they would stuff the big noses with basically potpourri just to kind of hide, help them be able to breathe in those plague infected areas. But you've also got some other things. You've got this. This here is the Pick of Trepidation. If you know what trepanation is, it's the art of basically tapping little holes into somebody's head to relieve a headache. It was thought that that would be a way of relieving the pressure, and that's what caused headaches. And people did this, and actually some people survived it. So, and there are like case studies and those kinds of things. That's the thing that I want to point out here. Jason and Themis are both medical students, so they really understand the underlying medical side of all of the diseases and how they work and what happens in certain situations. They do understand these things, and it shows and shines through in every single adventure because they were overseeing everything. The Blossom of OSHADIS. This is the first adventure that's in the book, and it's the level 1 adventure, and I particularly picked this one out. I could have picked one of the other earlier adventures, but I like this one in specific because it has a unique starting premise. Your characters and your party members will start out not remembering who they are or how they got there. And that's a really interesting premise. Now, I've seen this done in things like Dread games or Call of Cthulhu, but I haven't seen it done that often in Dungeons and Dragons, mostly because there is this thought that you will remove player agency by doing so, that players won't be able to control what their actions are or how they got there. And that's true to an extent, and it even mentions in the adventure, but I don't think it necessarily is a problem. I think it's a really good idea. I think it makes the start of your adventure, or even your start of your D&D campaign, very different, especially if you're messing around with their memories. They can't trust them. They can't trust what they know or they think they know, and it makes it very different from your classic campaign start. Starting in a tavern is fine for some, but I think for a veteran group, they might want something a little different, something more unique, and something more challenging. And I think this provides that. In addition to that, because of the way that this adventure is set out, they can't trust things they see either. Illusions and hallucinations feature quite heavily in this adventure, and so things that they think are true aren't necessarily real, and the things that they think they remember. There's some really great points in the adventure where they go through handouts and say, give this player these handouts, give these player this handouts, and the players can't even trust them, which is a really cool thing because it kind of gives them an understanding of what a disease like this would do to players. They can't trust each other, they can't trust each other's information, and they can't trust their own information until they've managed to deal with whatever is wrong with them. It also comes included with this beautiful map. So you've got this flat map, and then you've got this really nice isometric map. And I think this isometric map is really nice to have, particularly because of how it deals with depth and layers and things like that. It really is nice to have, especially when you have an isometric map. I always like to see a flat map along with it, because implementing isometric in things like VTTs is basically impossible. I've done it before, it is very difficult to do so. So, that's the Blossom of OSHADIS. Things I liked about the adventure: I really like the premise and the start, and the really, really strong start. I like the way it does things, and the way you do this adventure is you backtrack from the end of the dungeon and move your way out, because of the nature of what's going on. It's really an interesting premise, and I really like it for that. Things I didn't like, there isn't much I didn't like about this adventure. But let's go on to the next one. The Passenger. And that's this guy here. This beautiful piece of art here. Look at that. Look at that, how nice that is. And freaking creepy. I'll probably put up another picture there, a better quality one, just so you can see it. But it is really creepy. And as you can tell, this one features mind flayers as they kind of like central antagonists. So, saying that, I'm going to have to spoiler this one, because there's no way to talk about it without spoilering it, without great difficulty. So I'm going to put a spoiler warning here. If you don't want to hear about the adventure, if you want to play this adventure, if you really like the bait, you like mind flayers and things like that, I would say yes, play this adventure, but maybe skip ahead to the end and hear my final thoughts. So, The Passenger. The Passenger centers around a set of 3 robberies that have occurred in Waterdeep that nobody seems to understand how the thieves managed to know as much as they did. The various people who are affected by this include people like Jarlaxle, various nobles, and basically anyone who has a ton of money hanging around, but should be pretty safe and well insulated from most of the normal robbers and thieves guilds that operate in Waterdeep. But somehow somebody got in. Now, the whole premise is based around a disease that allows the mind flayer to kind of piggyback on somebody's sensory perceptions. It has a slow effect, slowly building up to the point where the mind flayers can see through their visions and hear what they hear. It allows them to gain information, and information is power. Once you know everything and know how they think the operates work, you can do things like, on Jarlaxle's ship, for example, you can disable the illusion that allows them to walk about freely while not looking like drow. Because, not everyone trusts a drow, but the second the illusion goes down, all the crew members that look like drow have to hide in their decks, in their ships, in their basically their rooms until somebody can turn the illusion back on. At which point, somebody comes in and robs them. Now, the whole thing is based around this restaurant that exists somewhere within Waterdeep that your adventurers must find and locate so that they can get there and deal with the problem. Now, dealing with the problem is very difficult because you're dealing with a whole bunch of mind flayers and they hand their thralls. You're not fighting faceless monsters. You're fighting townsfolk who are coming at you with spears, with knives and kitchen forks and rolling pins and things like that. They're trying to kill you, but they're basically innocent bystanders. And it's how your players deal with that I think makes this really interesting. It's very insidious to think that there's a possibility that any one of your players can be infected, and I think that is one of the options here, is you can infect a player very early on and have them kind of be a spy for these mind flayers, and then the players wonder what's going on. Now, however, if they figure this out, there's a lot of room for some interesting stuff happening here. A lot of things that can happen around that are some like feeding of false information to the mind flayers and then cutting off, somehow ending the disease so that you can cause the mind flayers to do things that you wouldn't ordinarily. I really like this adventure. It's very simple. It has some really nice maps inside of it, specifically there's a couple of areas that exist later on. You get a nice map of Waterdeep, and then you get this nice map of the kind of like outer areas. And you also get a map of the inner areas for the restaurant when the final confrontation occurs. Really, really nice. Really, really well done. Right, now what did I like about the Malady Chronicles? I liked a lot of things about it. I liked the focus on diseases. I think it makes them very interesting. I think it makes the adventures very different. I think it gives a very unique an interesting perspective on the ways players deal with problems. Because of the fact that you have things like plague outbreaks that can occur, you have things like players being infected by various diseases that don't necessarily get removed by lesser restoration or anything of that nature, or you get abilities and diseases that don't necessarily manifest very quickly, and by the time they do, it's a little too late. And the way that they're affecting players makes it hard for them to manage properly. Particularly in the first adventure, where the players don't even necessarily realize they're infected or that other people might be infected, and that the encounter designs in that thing in those adventures are specifically tailored because you may be infected with these diseases, and they make them harder because of those infections. It's a really interesting idea, and I think that makes them very different. Your central antagonist is no longer a creature, but the disease itself, which makes it very insidious. You can't reason with it. You can't trick it. It just is. It's almost like a force of nature trying to fight a hurricane. It makes it a very different set of adventures. I also really liked a lot of the art in here. There's some really, really beautiful stuff. Some really, really creepy stuff as well. I mean, like, just this one here. Look, that's very evocative of the kind of thing you see in the background. There's this guy dragging a body near a burning pyre, probably likely of bodies, and this is something that happened quite a lot in these kinds of situations where you had these horrible incidences where plagues broke out and you had to do something about the bodies, or, well, the worst could occur and the disease would just spread more. You also have things like, if you look at the back of the book, you have this really quite insidious eye. And all of the art is like this. It really evokes the right imagery, evokes the right kind of ideas behind this, evokes the right kind of like thought process around these are diseases, this is kind of a terrible thing, these are terrible, terrible situations and you need to deal with them. It really has a good way of getting you into the right mindset. So there's a lot to love about this book in general, and I really like the quality of the book as well in general. Another thing I really liked about it is because they're all written by different authors, you get a lot of different ways of writing, different ways of approaching problems, different ways of looking at situations, and different adventure styles. You get some very heavy roleplay ones, you get some very heavy action and counter design ones, you get some really good battle stuff, you even get some really good exploration tier adventures, especially that last one, the second one I did, where it was more about exploring Waterdeep, finding things out, and more investigation style adventure. And those are rare and they're hard to get right, and they're usually hard to get right because the person you're trying to... The problem with investigation adventures in general is that finding out who done it is generally very easy when you have things like Charm and Zone of Truth. In this one, because of the nature of it, that doesn't work, which is really nice. Your main antagonist, you can't directly interact with for a long time, which keeps him safe from those spells and keeps them generally insulated from that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a really, really cool thing. I really like it. What didn't I like about the Malady Chronicles? And I think there's only one thing I would mention here, and there's a problem with consistency with adventures written like this, adventure compendiums written like this. And I think it happens sometimes with WotC Adventures as well. It doesn't always happen. It usually happens a lot more with the DM's Guild products. And that's not a question of consistency of writing. Writing is very good across all of the adventures. What I'm more talking about is things like the kinds of maps you use, the style of map you use, the style of art you use, the style of handouts, how many you use. So for example, you get maps like this here. This is the first one, the Temple of OSHADIS. And then you get, later on, you might get a different style of map. Let's see, let's find a good one. And you might get a map like this, which is from the Naughty Gnome. I had to pick that one. But my point is that the style of map is very different depending on which one you've got. And there's a lot of different things in terms of formatting style that are a little different as well in terms of adventure to adventure, just because different writers prefer different formats and different styles. And that sometimes can cause a bit jarring between adventures, especially if you're trying to run this as a whole campaign. Another thing I might mention, just as a general aside, is that I think for every single adventure in here, if you were to try to run this as a full campaign, your players may get diseased out. There are a lot of very similar themes and ideas in this in terms of the way things are structured because of what's happening and the way that diseases are the central focus. So you may, if you were going to run this as a campaign, you may want to break this up with a few side quests every so often to kind of give players something else to do, something more outside the main themes that the book offers. In the same way that the Tomb of Annihilation breaks it up by doing three separate things, or Curse of Strahd breaks it up by doing separate cities essentially, and they're basically almost like living mini adventures within themselves. But yeah, like I said, I think you might want to break up some of the. If you're going to run this as a full campaign, I would recommend putting some side quests in between a couple of the adventures just to give something to kind of break up the not the monotony, I think is the wrong word because that has a very negative connotation, but more of the kind of to give more differences of expectations in terms of what's going on and how players manage things, so they don't always don't get super saturated by a very specific type of adventure. But those are the other things I would mention in terms of like things I didn't like. My final thoughts. I really like this book. just as a book. It's a nice book. I like the set of adventures that are contained within. All 9 are very, very good for what they are. They have some interesting ideas about how you manage various things. And because the central themes are diseases rather than some terrible dragon rampaging across the countryside, I think a lot of DMs will feel like they've gained something different. They've gained a new perspective on how to run a very different style of adventure out of this book. And I think every DM out there will find at least 2, maybe 3 adventures. And for $14.95 for the PDF, you're getting a really, really great value there. Running it as a whole campaign, like I said, break it up with a couple of side quests and you've got some really great. As for my rating, I'm going to rate this guy a 5 out of 5. I really, really like this. Jason and Themis are really, really great in terms of being able to put this all together. And all the writers who contributed are an amazing set of DM's Guild writers. I know a lot of them, and I've done of reviews for a lot of their work throughout the years? Not sure how long I've been doing this. I don't want to know anymore. Anyways, thank you for watching. This has been DM Dongo. Please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to pick up the Malady Chronicles, please do remember to use my affiliate code, which will be down below. Thank you, and peace out.